Hello and welcome to another episode of Feeding Fatty. I'm your host, Roy.
I'm Terry.
So we're the podcast, we're journaling, or we are kind of chronicling my journey through the health and wellness, trying to become more healthy and have more wellness through nutrition, physical fitness, mindset, just, kind of well-rounded, well-balanced, as we're not necessarily, doing anything that's off the charts. And from time to time, we also bring guests that are professionals in this field. And today we're fortunate enough to have Cheryl McColgan with us. She is the founder and editor of Heal Nourish Grow, an ultimate wellness, healthy lifestyle, and advanced nutrition site. She helps others develop the confidence and habits to create lasting change and greater health by sharing her wealth of knowledge and over 25 years experience in psychology, addiction studies, fitness, nutrition, yoga, health, and wellness. Cheryl, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to be with us. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. If you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about your journey. I know that, we've talked a little bit about in 2006, you kind of came to the low carb and keto after some a particular time in your life. So if you could just give us a little background on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's actually 2016 or something
16.
like that, but we can. Oh yeah, no worries. I'll give you the time frame just because some people like to know how long you've been doing this, because
Right.
a lot of things you hear in the media is like, is low carb and keto, is it really sustainable? Well, I've been low carb for 5 years at this point and keto for 4, so I would venture to say it's pretty darn sustainable.
Right.
But how I got into it from a health perspective is I had, like everybody getting a little older, was working a really stressful job and was starting to put on some weight. And I was not super happy about that because my whole life I've been focused on health and wellness, right? And I wasn't really eating anything substantially different or doing anything, but I wasn't sleeping well and I had a lot of stress. And PS, for people out there, if weight loss is a goal, getting stress and sleep under control is a bigger component of that than anybody likes to talk about or wants to think about, but it is.
Yeah, don't we know it?
So anyway, once I started kind of digging around and I'd done it all at this point. So I'm going to be 48 here shortly. And I grew up in the 90s where it was a low fat craze still. And, all through my teenage years. And I don't think I ever touched butter for years and years and years because I was so, low fat. And then I was vegetarian for 7 years. So every time I would come across a paradigm where I thought it was, the healthiest thing, right? I would do that, and I'm pretty committed, so I do it for a while. But I think one of the benefits is I'm also very science-minded and open to learning about new things. And so whenever I'm faced with new information, new studies, new research that kind of goes against what I might have previously been doing, I'm willing to take that on. And so when I started reading about keto and low carb and when I first started, there wasn't nearly as many resources and things as there are now. But I read enough that it convinced me that, this is what I need to be doing. This makes a lot of sense if I think about it in, how we eat or how we should eat from an evolutionary perspective. It made perfect sense. And so I kind of just jumped right in and really quickly started feeling a lot better, lost the weight that I had put on, had a lot of really amazing brain benefits. I actually think that's one of the biggest reasons that people should, be watching their carb and sugar intake, is because the effects, long-term effects it can have on your brain.
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your questions. That's how I got into it. And I taught yoga for over 10 years and was a runner and all this crazy stuff. So all this health and wellness stuff has just been a part of my life for really, my whole adult life now.
And didn't you have a health issue as well?
I did. So I actually, to make it as short as possible, I had fibroid tumors. And by the way, if I knew what I knew now, I probably would have changed my diet then, because those kind of growths and things in your body can really be fueled by glucose and sugar. But I had a ton of fibroids, a lot of pain, ended up having a partial hysterectomy. And then a few years later, started having some more problems. And long story short of how they did the surgery, the fibroids ended up implanting all over my abdomen. So then I they thought I had cancer for a while. I had to live for 2 months thinking I had cancer before I went to the Mayo Clinic, and they took them all out. Thankfully, no cancer.
Wow.
But it really was a huge wake up call. Like I said, I'd been involved in all these health and wellness practices for years and years up to that point. But then to still realize, like, hey, I'm doing all these healthy things, but I still have this major problem. What else is there? And that's kind of when I started going off the deep end with the research and sort of the biohacking type of things, these kind of more advanced methods to work on, getting your health back, and particularly your metabolic health.
Yeah, and that, a good point that you bring up is so much has come to light here about the inflammation and how it's, I may be over exaggerating this, but it seems that inflammation tends to be a catalyst for so many things for it to go wrong with us. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, the carbs and the sugar, they actually can fuel that inflammation even more.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I mean, the more and more I read and research and listen to other doctors that work in these fields and talk about it, the inflammation is the root. Inflammation in and of itself is not a negative, because it's your body's response to a pain process or an insult, right? And it's actually needed for healing. But the problem is we're more in a state of inflammation all the time.
Right.
And carbs and sugar certainly do that a lot, as do polyunsaturated fats. They're finding a lot of these vegetable things like soy and corn oils are very, very inflammatory in people as well. So there's this whole, other side that you can go to beyond just, restricting carbs and sugar is, these other ingredients that are also kind of harmful to us, and also environmental factors, different chemicals. I mean, there's just so much. It can be overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, the other thing about carbs is the addiction factor. We talked a little bit about this when we had a conversation the other day, and it's important that people realize that, my opinion again, carbs are basically like smoking, alcohol,
Crack.
yeah, crack. Yeah.
Carb crack.
It's an addiction, and we don't realize. I don't think we give ourselves enough of a break to say we've got to. It's going to take some time to move away from eating this heavy carb, and you're probably in a better position to explain that. Also, the carbs and the sugars, they release, I guess, the good endorphins. So you go back to your sleep, what you said, and we seek that for energy, but we also seek it when we need to have a little bit of a emotional lift, I guess.
Bring me up, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you eat sugar or sweets, and particularly the food industry has, at this point, designed food that is perfectly the amount of salt, sugar, fat in it that lights up your brain. And so it's addictive in a very, very real way. You eat some sugar, you get a dopamine release in your brain. Dopamines are happy neurotransmitter, right? So it's there's every reason to believe that it's truly addictive, not only in a physiological way, but also just a habit and emotional way. It's what we tend to reach for when we're celebrating, or when we're sad, or when everything is really around food, gatherings and everything. So, and the sad thing about it in comparison to other addictions is, for example, you don't need alcohol to live, right? In fact, most of us would be better off without it, even though I love it.
Red wine's good.
The beauty of those kind of addictions, like, cocaine or alcohol or whatever it is, you don't need those to live. You can go cold turkey. You can leave those behind, and your body functions even 1,000 times better without it. But that's not the case with food. You still have to eat something.
Right.
So you can't go cold turkey. You can't just stop eating. I mean, although we are going to talk about fasting today, so that kind of leads to that. But that's the challenge with the food addiction, is that you do actually have to still eat. And that is one thing that really low carb or keto helps with, is that it puts your hormones, ghrelin and leptin are your hunger hormones, right? So ghrelin, I always like to think of it as, the little gremlins that from the movie back in the 80s that like go crazy after dark if you feed them. So that's your hunger one. That's how I remember that one. And then leptin is more the satiety hormone. So what happens as you do keto over time is that these hormones balance out a lot more. And so it becomes easier for people to avoid the carbs and sugar because they're not hormonally being signaled to constantly, eat that food again. So I think that in that regard, it's really a great way of eating for people that have a true food addiction.
Yeah, and the other thing, what I've noticed is you can actually have a carb, or I guess maybe people react different, but I've actually felt like I've had carb hangovers before, where, you get up in the morning and, your head feels stopped up, you just feel cloudy, and, you can trace that back to some, around here going out and eating, Mexican food with chips and very carb heavy. And, I noticed the cleaner I eat, I wake up in the mornings much clearer headed and just not congested and all stopped up. And probably some food allergies in there as well. Not saying it's all that, but I guess I feel like I've kind of linked that back to, if I eat a heavy carbs the previous day, I can expect that next morning that it'll take me a couple hours to get out from under it.
Yep. I've definitely heard the same thing from other people. And I think everybody is a little bit bio-individual. And so somebody, maybe if you eat a whole food carb, like sweet potatoes, for example, might have a different effect than some of the more processed things. But that's just something that people kind of learn over time, what really works.
Yeah.
But in general, I would say people do better with anything that's whole foods, even if it's more carby. Yeah. That tends to agree with people's systems a little better.
Yeah, and I was talking about the totally bad carbs in fried
Totally
foods
bad,
and
but
stuff.
tastes
Yeah,
so good.
it's like a carb in a good sweet potato. It's not, probably not as much.
Oh,
Nobody ever. It would be hard to really gain weight or have a whole lot of trouble if you're really truly only eating whole foods. So right. I think for a lot of people that think that they can never totally give up carbs, it's like, well, we're not saying do this forever. We're saying, depending on what your goals are and where your health status is. I think you shared with me when we had our pre-call that you had diabetes. So obviously you have some different things, different goals there than maybe some other people that are, say if you only need to lose weight and you're not diabetic, you might be able to enjoy carbs a little bit more often. I think it's always like, what are your goals is what I always go back to.
Right. People. Yeah, and I just, I have to be careful with the carbs because they do, I can check your blood sugar enough, you see that they, especially the bad ones, and that's what I'm talking about, is just eating really poor choices, junk. I can see that it just drives me up where, you can eat more of the better carbs. Or the other thing too, I think if you mix it with a fiber, I don't know, there's all kinds of combinations that you can do to make it a little better, but trying to get out and take a walk, that's another thing that I've done is, after a meal, just try to get out a short 10-minute walk or something to kind of walk that down helps a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. No, there's definitely this idea of, glucose disposal. And so walking or exercise after eating a higher carb meal is a great example of that because it drives your blood sugar down more quickly. There's also a supplement that I'd like to mention for people that might not be familiar with it called berberine. There's been some studies on that, and that is actually almost as effective as metformin in controlling glucose after carby meals. So really? If you're a person where, say, you love Mexican food and you're going to have some chips that night and maybe some of the beans or whatever, then it might be a good idea to take some berberine with that meal so that it mitigates some of the impact of the carbs.
Okay, cool. I'll write that down.
Interesting. Yeah.
All right. So,
so you mentioned fasting. Sorry.
No, that's where I was actually going to go there.
Okay.
Yeah, you're fine.
So you mentioned fasting. What are the benefits of fasting? I mean, there's so many different times that
I think you might still be muted.
Oh.
I can't hear you too.
Can you hear me now? No?
Uh-oh. It looks like we've lost. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, and now I can hear Terry's.
Okay. Oh, whoa.
Okay.
I don't like not being
heard. That whole part where you got all excited. And
I was like fasting.
Yeah.
So can we talk about the benefits of fasting? And then there's so many different times, from 4 hours to 12 to 16, and then you said 60 the other day, and my eyes almost popped out of my head. So can we talk about that?
Absolutely. And this is one of the things I am most passionate about for a variety of reasons that we'll probably get to at some point. But I really feel like it's one of the most powerful health tools that we have outside of your diet. So if you have somebody that's really resistant to ever, going low carb or really changing their diet, if they can just incorporate fasting, it has got a huge impact. And the thing is, it's slightly more challenging when you aren't eating low carb to fast, because you haven't evened out that blood sugar. So you're going to have those spikes, and you're still going to be getting all these hormonal signals to eat, which makes it just makes it more challenging. Once you become low carb and you've done it for a long time, your body becomes what we call fat adapted, which means it's very trained, and all of your metabolic processes have upregulated in order to be able to use fat for fuel. And so if you don't eat, that's fine, because your body has, even the thinnest among us has a ton of body fat that you could live off of for days if you needed. So I think it's still doable. I've had plenty of people do extended fasts that are not keto or not low carb, and it's just, they can do it. It's just more challenging. So before we get into the different types, like you said, though, I kind of just want to touch on this idea of why fasting is so powerful, and also why low carb.
I was going, Amazon's here.
Oh my gosh.
I'm so sorry. Come here. You. It'll be just a second.
Oh my gosh.
Come here.
Hey.
Come
Must
here.
have somebody at the door.
It was Amazon.
Oh,
One
my
last
goodness.
fell swoop. Excuse us.
Oh my gosh.
Terribly behaved dogs.
Okay.
They're very protective.
Well, at least that was a good cutoff point.
Oh my gosh.
Right. Oh my gosh. Now where were we?
Okay, fast. Yeah, you were gonna. Let's just back up and talk a little bit about what it is, and then you were gonna say what are some of the benefits that we can gain from that.
Yeah. So before all that, just a little backstory. There's kind of two ideas of weight loss at this point, or two theories, right? And calories in, calories out. We all know that one. That's what's been hammered into us for years. Eat less, move more. It's all about the calories, right?
Right.
And there are plenty of people that will just hammer that until the day they die.
Yeah.
But the truth lies somewhere in between. It's not just calories in and energy expenditure. There's this other side that's hormonal that we kind of touched on a little bit. But what happens with keto and fasting is that you regulate some of these hormones out, and that contributes to weight loss as well. And then there's kind of this other one that's been coming around the keto space lately, and that's this idea of polyunsaturated fats, which I mentioned before, the bad vegetable oils that create inflammation. They actually, the two guys that do this are super techie and super scientific, but I'm going to say it in the most basic way. It basically mucks up your mitochondria. So your mitochondria are the part of your cell that generates energy.
Yeah.
And when you have too much polyunsaturated fat, it just kind of messes that whole system up, and it doesn't allow you to burn fat as easily. So there's a combination of factors. It's not just move more, eat less.
Okay.
That's not the end of the story. There's sleep, there's hormones, there's all these things that we've already talked about, right? But as far as the fasting, why fasting helps in this process, of course, because you're not eating, you're reducing calories. So if you believe in the calories in, calories out, yes, you're going to lose weight for that because you're going to eat less food. But there's also all of these other amazing benefits. And there's, by the way, the whole article on this on my site with all the citations about the benefits of fasting, because it's how much I love it. But I really started doing it. So like I said, I've been in yoga and all this craziness. I mean, I've done all kinds of fasts. You guys are the age group. You might remember the Master Cleanse. Remember when that was real big? It's just like lemon. Okay, so I mean, I've done that. I've done these Ayurvedic khichdi cleanses. I've done juice fasts. I mean, I've tried it all, and I always have done fasting in some shape or form, mostly from being around the yoga community. But then in 2016, I think this might have been where you got that. One of the dates we were talking about is that I learned about the Nobel Prize for autophagy, and basically autophagy is your body's cellular cleanup process. And it happens most strongly when you're not eating food, right? So because I had those tumors, and because there was a lot of cancer in my family, I was like, hey, well, I've done fasting before. I can do that. And it does all these amazing things in my body. I should probably do that on a more regular basis because of those health benefits. So autophagy is one of them. And that typically kicks in anywhere after 24 hours. It's happening to some degree all the time. So even when you wake up in the morning after an overnight fast, you're
Oh no.
And then there's also the fact that it increases your human growth hormone. So as we age, human growth hormone declines, and that is one of the things that really helps you maintain and build muscle. And the more muscle we have as we get older, muscle is the most metabolically active thing. So I think we just lost Terry, but it's most metabolically active. So it helps you burn more calories if you have more muscle. So human growth hormone for that reason is a very good thing. That's about 48 hours and longer. And then after 72 hours, we have this immune regulation, regeneration thing that happens. Again, that's on my site and I've got the study cited. And then anything after that, it's debatable whether anything beyond 72 hours is necessary. But again, it depends on your goals. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But there are still benefits there. And if you're not in ketosis already, just by fasting for 18 to 24 hours, you'll go into a state usually of a low level ketosis. So that's just some of there's a whole bunch more on the thing, but that's all the benefits.
Well, so is this like building up to run a marathon? Is that, I mean, do you want to fast for, 10 or 12 hours, a few days or a few times, and then work your way up into the 60 hours? Or is it something that you can just say, hey, I'm doing 24 hours and just jump in and do it?
Well, the marathon one is a great analogy because I think if you want to make it the easiest on yourself, it's kind of like using a muscle or working out or flex.
Right.
The more you do it, the easier it gets. So some of the initial times you do it, it might be a little bit more challenging, especially if you're not used to doing it. So I would definitely recommend, build up to it. I'd like to see everybody do a minimum of 14 hours a day, which is mostly accomplished while you're sleeping. So let's say you eat dinner by 6, you stop eating, you go to bed, you might not eat for an hour or two in the morning, and then you're good. You've accomplished 14 hours, and you're going to get some amazing benefits just from that.
Okay.
Because, we've all been around. I mean, I think the bodybuilders kind of brought this in to say, and it's not to say it's wrong, but again, it depends on your goals. But, this eating every 2 hours and constant snacking and all of this, all it does is raise your insulin every time you consume something. And if you buy into this hormonal theory, all that's doing is creating those crash and burns all day that stimulates hunger, that creates all these metabolic effects that are not beneficial, basically. So if you can get a solid, 14 hours without consuming anything, that's an amazing start. And you can, like I said, do most of that while you're sleeping. So it's really, for most people, is not that challenging, except for the not snacking after dinner. I know a lot of people like to do that. So.
Yeah.
She was talking to me.
Yeah. That's my, the evening, and this is a bad habit I developed years ago, but, that 9, 10 o'clock at night, if I don't go to bed early, then all of a sudden, I'm wanting to go up to the convenience store, and I tell Terry, I said, I'll go up there for you. If you want a candy bar, I'll be glad to go up there and get that for you.
It's always for me.
Right?
You want one?
I'm just going to talk about the low carb. I guess I'm going to pose this as a question, not a statement. So, there is research around the fact that our brains work off of the carbs. The carbs fuel our brains, but listening to some other keto podcast, and these were some medical experts. These weren't just the, kind of the guy off the street telling me what he thought, but they were medical experts saying that really our brains were designed to run off of fat. And so with the keto, we're kind of switching that back over from our brain running on carbs to it running on fat. It's myth. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is that the truth?
I can substantiate these claims.
Okay.
So your brain does actually need I think it's 120 grams of glucose every day to survive. Okay. But here's what nobody ever says. Your body can make all of that glucose. Yeah. You don't have to consume 120 grams of glucose because think about it. If that would have been the case, we'd all be dead. We never would have evolved if your brain couldn't function without carbs. So that makes no logical sense. Right. So that we can just throw that out the door. Right. There's also evidence that, and actually I love this study. This excites me so much. And I need to learn this lady's name, but I can send you the link later. She's a Harvard researcher, super smart, smarty pants lady. And one of her research things is about glucose utilization in the brain. So one of the things that they think is happening in people that have Alzheimer's and dementia is that they can't process glucose in their brain very well anymore. They're starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, actually. This is how attached to glucose it is. So, but what she discovered through her research is even in brains, and this happens, by the way, and this is why I'm so interested in this, my psychology degree, I went to grad school, I was in clinical neuropsychology, so I've always been into the brain stuff, but your brain never loses the ability to use ketones for fuel. So even if you get a brain that's like a dementia brain that has already had some neuronal die-off, so if you remember back to high school science, like the neurons kind of come together and there's a space in between. But anyway, the neurons are what helps your brain communicate, basically, and those die with dementia or get damaged. And they can't use glucose anymore because they've been so abused, but they can always still use ketones. So I just think the implications for that are amazing because at this point, they really don't have any good Alzheimer's drugs. And so if you look at, that's for an extreme example, but if you look at the rest of us who we just have an aging brain, that this happens a little bit naturally over time, that your brain, is not quite as quick and we can't remember quite as well. Well, some of that could be because of carb problems over the years, right? So both my husband and I have both found this. He keeps saying that he feels like his brain just keeps getting sharper the longer that he does low carb. And then we both use a little supplement in the morning that goes in our coffee that has MCT oil in it. And MCT oil actually helps your body produce more ketones. Probably the caffeine is obviously giving you a little jolt too, but the clarity that comes when your brain runs on ketones is just amazing to me. I can't describe the difference.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's kind of about the, what a part of that carb hangover I was talking about earlier is when I watch mine and do very well, I just seem so much clearer, thinking, more creative, not bogged down, not that it's hard to remember, Terry's name or not crazy stuff like that. But, when you're working through complex problems at work, sometimes you can be a little slower or just not feel like you're on your game. And I feel like carbs, for me personally, I think they add to that cloudiness.
Just dull everything.
Yeah. And you mentioned something else. We talked a little bit about that the type 3 diabetes, is the Alzheimer's. I guess I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you do know this, is that so as if we are diabetic, uncontrolled, for many years, does the study say that that's kind of what is leading into the Alzheimer's?
That's my understanding of it. Okay. And just to reiterate for people here, I'm not a medical professional. Right. I'm a psychology person, but I do read a lot of research. Yeah. It's my passion. And this is, I write about this stuff all the time. That is my basic understanding of it, is that this, uncontrolled blood sugar, not even maybe in a diabetic, I just read a new study that just came out that said even pre-diabetes, I think this was in relation to heart disease actually, but they found a link even between just pre-diabetes and these problems. So, but yes, that is it. It's like this glucose inability to process glucose because we've kind of damaged ourselves metabolically. And if you, again, just going back to pure logic, if you think about evolution, so we can't keep up. Like we're not evolved to eat what we're putting in our bodies the last 150 years. We're evolved to eat, meat and whatever we can forage, basically, is what we're designed to eat. Meanwhile, we've added all this stuff to our diets that just Doesn't make any sense. It's highly processed. It's things that your body can't recognize. The two guys I was talking about before that talk about the polyunsaturated fats are like, well, part of the issue is your body is made all of saturated fat. It doesn't recognize this thing that we're putting in there. And that's what's mucking up the system. That's what that's again, my basic description of it, but mucking it up.
That's a Midwestern term. I used to say that.
Yeah, totally. Or my dad's hog barn when I was a kid, probably the mucking. But anyway, so I just think if you think of it from a very logical perspective, what we're putting in our bodies, we're not designed to. It makes sense that it would cause some problems for us down the road, whether that's, just about anything you can name, as you mentioned before, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, all of these things are just so related to what we're putting in our body that's not natural.
Yeah. And I guess the point I was hoping to make with that is that if you're not worried about losing a toe or losing your eyesight and all the other complications that go along with diabetes, this new, link between diabetes and Alzheimer's, that is kind of a life sentence. And hopefully, if you do have to struggle with it, it's later rather than sooner, but we don't get to make that choice. And so I guess
if you can.
Yeah, you just kind of drive home that, the importance of making sure that if you are diabetic, your sugar's under control. That makes it even more important to me. And that's what, it's been kind of a wake-up call since we talked earlier in the week about, because that's something that I had known and had lost, didn't think about, but definitely makes me, want to do better, because
it's never too late to start.
No.
At least just start, especially if you are hearing what Cheryl's talking about. The Alzheimer's part scary. That's the one thing that everything's scary, but when you age, but losing the brain function and all of that, and forgetting who your family members are and all of that, that's a really scary thing. And my dad had it for a good 10, 12 years, and he passed away about 5 years ago, but it was just a sad thing to watch. And all of his siblings he had 4 siblings. All of his siblings had, I think one had dementia, the rest of them all had Alzheimer's. So it's a real thing for me, for sure. So keto's sounding really good right now.
Well, the other thing, I hate to belabor the point, but since we've kind of came here, the other point about this is the, it just slipped my mind.
Well.
Oh my gosh, I had something really going there. But
well, Cheryl was going to say something.
Go ahead.
Maybe Cheryl, she's young enough she can remember.
I don't know exactly where you were going with that, but I guess, I think sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I get really worried that people would just think, well, it's all doom and gloom, and what the hell can I eat?
Yeah.
Right.
And, I think the beauty thing in all of this that we're talking about is that the solution, I'm not going to say it's easy, but the solution is simple. The solution is carb restriction and fasting.
Yeah.
And most people can do at least part of that to some degree. It's not that difficult. I'm not going to say you have to be perfect all the time, but it's just like moving in that direction. And over time, like I'm sure you've experienced with after learning that you had diabetes, like, oh, well, what do I do now? And then it's starting to make these changes, and it just, it takes time. So give yourself some grace. But I think the exciting thing part of it is that it's changeable. Like they didn't used to think this. They thought diabetes was like, there's nothing they can do. It just keep giving you more insulin until you get an amputation and die. It's like, before that was scary to me. Now to say to somebody, if we can just keep getting the word out there more, like it's actually controllable. And I would say some people don't agree with this in the medical community, but I think it's curable with the style of eating that you do.
Reversible, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. At least reversible. I just think that's so exciting. And I think it should be a real positive thing to know that you can avoid some of these really bad negative effects from having diabetes or getting brain problems or anything.
Well, we've interviewed a lot of people. I'll say a lot. We've probably had 4 or 5 people that have come on the show that had out of control diabetes, and now it's their glucose was. We had a guy that I think now he went into a coma. I think his was over 500, And that's like, I said, can you repeat that? 500. And he actually passed out at a restaurant. And yeah, it's an awesome episode. If anybody wants to go back and listen to it, you can.
He
But
had
anyway,
never been diagnosed with diabetes before he had that pass out.
yeah, but he cleaned his eating up, and he is off all his medication and doesn't take it. So, I guess as you said, we're not medical professionals, but I think there's enough evidence out there that some people can they can change their lifestyle, and it can make a huge difference with their glucose.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just, there's a ton of anecdotal evidence at this point, but there have been new studies that have come out fairly recently showing how low carb can control and reverse diabetes very quickly. This happens in weeks for people. Once they really get it down and get with the program and be like, yes, I'm doing this whole low carb thing. Their sugars come down within weeks. It's amazing.
I did write down, I remembered what I was going to say earlier, is that when we were talking about Alzheimer's and, excuse me, I used to write some original content for an aging website that we have, and I had found a theory that the spike that we see now in Alzheimer's can be traced back to the low-fat craze of the 70s coming into the 80s. And so it's interesting because, we worry about carbs fueling the brain, but some of the studies that I had said is that, when we cut that the fat in the brain is what helps keep everything connected. I guess the neurons that you were talking about earlier and their connections, the fat kind of keeps them gelled together. Can you elaborate, or would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that idea is an interesting one. And I don't have, so there's this old movie called Lorenzo's Oil. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I've seen it.
But so the idea is so that nerves, including the nerves in your brain and stuff, they all have this sheath called a myelin sheath over them. And this kid in the movie had a disease where his myelin sheath was degenerating. And basically once the sheath goes, then your nerves can no longer communicate and you're done. Like that's the end of the story. So what they were doing was they kept giving him oil, and I don't know what kind of oil they used in the movie. I'm going to assume some kind of saturated fat, if what we've been talking about is all, related and true.
Right.
But that it was able to, they kept giving him such a quantity of oil to like kind of combat this problem with the sheath, and so that his nerves could still communicate. So I think that there is definitely something there. I think, a higher fat diet allows your body to naturally produce more ketones, particularly MCT. MCT is like really easily transferable from that form of fat into ketones. Yeah. And my own personal experience, I said, growing up when I did the whole low fat thing, I really struggled with depression and anxiety most of my adult life until I went keto. And, now I am liberal with the saturated fat. And my brain just, I think, dual purpose, I think, because of the ketones themselves acting in my brain, but then also, additional fat in my diet, I think is just healthier for you on so many levels, especially for us as women. You really need a proper amount of fat in your diet to produce good hormones. Yes. And it wouldn't surprise me if all that, fibroid problems that I had in the past had to do with, my hormones being out of whack because I didn't eat any fat. I just think that's so silly that we still try to teach people that that's right. a reasonable thing to do. It's not. Being low fat is very difficult and very harmful.
Yeah.
And there's a study, there's some studies that are going on. It was a very limited, the story that sparked the studies, let me put it that way, is that a lady, her husband had Alzheimer's. And, one of the Alzheimer's tests is that you draw the clock face and have the person, try to put the 1, 2, 3, 4 round and see how it. And so anyway, this guy's initial clock was like all the numbers were down at 5. And I don't know why she started doing this, but she started giving him 3 tablespoons of coconut oil every day. And after about 6 weeks, he was able to pretty much label the clock correctly. And I want to clarify this by saying one person that I know of, but there was a doctor, a research PhD, that came out and talked to a group of us, and she said that there was enough evidence that there were 3 or 4 longitudinal studies that were launched because of that, because I guess there's more evidence that they may help, but again, we get back to the fat in the fat in the diet, and there's ways to mix it in. You just have to be careful because it's very high calorically, and so it's about 130 calories per tablespoon. But we mix it in our smoothies and try to use it in different ways, to hide it in food as we go through our day.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point there. And just for your listeners, if they are more interested, I believe you're talking about Dr. Mary Newport.
Okay.
Because she has that exact story. It was her husband that had Alzheimer's. She was actually, I believe, a pediatrician or some kind of doctor that had to do with children. She wasn't originally involved in brain function, but when her husband got it, she started looking into clinical trials and how are we going to help him? And what she came across was some trial that was going on that was to work on Alzheimer's with a food supplement. Well, she called them and explained, and she found out that food supplement was indeed MCT oil, coconut oil. And so that's how she started giving it to him. And now she kind of has been all around the research and speaking circuit, kind of sharing her story. She has a couple books out. But her research is so interesting. And I think the point that you made about MCT being very caloric is a good one because, obviously a lot of people, they come to this, one of their goals is weight loss. But I would say the thing about including more fat in your diet is that it's more satiating. So, and it tends to, again, even out those hunger signals. So even if you have a meal that you add the MCT or a little higher calorie with that fat, I would say you'll probably end up eating less overall just because you're more satisfied and you're feeling, the nice brain effects from that MCT boosting your ketones.
Right. Yeah. And now's a good time to kind of mention, and again, I'm going to pose this as a question to you, but we still have to watch our protein intake, and we still have to watch that fat intake just because of the caloric value. But something I heard interestingly enough on this was a keto-based podcast, is that if we eat enough protein, our body is able to translate that into carbs, and so it's I guess because there's at some limit we can just overdo it. It's like anything. At some limit, we can overdo anything, no matter how healthy. So I guess the point is that even though we're doing the low carb, we still have to pay attention to our levels of protein and the caloric intake that we have from the fat that we're eating.
Yeah, and I think some people would argue that with you. And I think, again, it's kind of just learning your personal tolerance. But for the protein, so what you're mentioning, your body can make glucose out of protein if it needs through this process called gluconeogenesis. Mm-hmm. And so there has been some talk in the keto space, if you overeat protein, does it, spike your glucose or kick you out of ketosis or these kind of things? Well, there's 2 schools of thought. One says it's demand driven, so that your body will only take protein and make it into glucose if it really, really needs it. Oh, okay. So for most people, they think that it's probably not that much of a concern. There's also this other concern that, again, I'm very focused on aging because I'm getting towards 50. But there's this other idea of, there's 2 ways to build muscle. We all know about weightlifting, resistance training, but you can also, just by prioritizing protein in your diet, can help you maintain and even build muscle mass. There's this one keto podcaster that I listened to, and she kind of did an experiment on herself with carnivore, and without really working out, over a couple of years of just prioritizing protein, she put on something like 8 pounds of lean mass just through prioritizing protein. So I think for a lot of people, it's kind of a non-concern. Yeah. It's very difficult to overeat protein. I'm really focused on eating more for those reasons I just described, and I find it challenging to get 100 grams of protein a day. I mean, I just do, and I'm not eating much else other than protein to start with. So I think for most people, it's probably not a super big concern. I think, again, if you are diabetic and you're checking your sugars and you notice, hey, if I eat a big steak and my glucose does do something a little funky, I think for most people that might just be the quantity of food sometimes too, causing that larger spike, not just that it was protein. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of different schools of thought on it right now. There's this guy, I can't remember if Ted Naiman is the one that do this. It's called the PE diet. So his is promoting a much higher protein paradigm. And then, there's people that'll say, well, keto is just a moderate protein. You don't need as much protein because keto in and of itself is very protein sparing. So again, I think it comes back to your goals. Like me, I'm focused on keeping the muscle I've got and trying to build more as I get older. So tend to be a little more on the protein heavier side. Right. But if it negatively affects your blood sugar and you're diabetic, maybe you want to moderate. Again, I think you just go back to what are your goals is what I always have to ask.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point about what we eat at a setting because, one thing about myself I notice is, I try to be around 40 to 60 carbs a day generally. And if I eat all 40 at one meal with the big old baked potato and some bread, of course, I see that the big spike. Whereas if I would just spread those 40 out over, a day's period, it doesn't have near as much effect. So I think that's a good point to bring up is while we can have a lot of things, sometimes it may be the quantity in which we eat them, or the other part of that is eating a big carb heavy meal right before bed, eating and then going to bed in a couple hours. So at least, for me, if I eat those carbs earlier in the day, it gives me a chance to burn them off. And so what I try to do is eat, heavier carbs in the morning and just try to taper those off as I come through the day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Terry, do you have anything else?
Well, I just wanted to make sure to mention that you have some delicious looking recipes on your website also. Is it a pistachio crusted, is it cod?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Oh my gosh. I have some mahi. I wonder if could I do the same thing? Maybe I'll do that.
I would totally do it with the mahi. It's really quick and easy too, because especially when you get a cod loin, they tend to be pretty thin, so they can be cooked really quickly. But when I make recipes for the website because that is part of what I do. Yeah. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm super boring with my food, and I actually think that a lot of people want to overcomplicate low carb. It's just like pick a protein, pick a low carb veggie. Put some butter on it, some little salt, you're done, basically. So, all the recipes are great and nice, and I have a lot of fun doing that. But I think, for the day-to-day basis, it's like just don't make it too hard for yourself. Just, go for the easy things like a, chicken breast and some whatever, or a steak and some Brussels sprouts or whatever it is,
Yeah, and even when you go out to eat, one thing that, I've found over time is that even if you don't see the straight grilled chicken breast on the menu, typically one of their meals has something that includes a grilled chicken breast that they do something else with. If you just ask for it, they are more than happy to just bring you some, the grilled chicken breast and some cauliflower or some, broccoli or something like that. So always ask. Don't not go out and have fun just because you think that you can't eat at the restaurant you're going to.
Right.
Yeah, actually, this is the easiest way of eating I've ever done. And right. I eat out a fair amount. We try not to do it too much, especially with this whole polyunsaturated fat thing. Because that is the one challenge in a restaurant is they're always going to have soy oil and corn oil and all this crappy oil on top. But I will say, it was, it's about 10,000 times easier than being a vegetarian trying to go out to eat.
Oh, gosh.
Right. Well, we have taken a lot of your time. It was such a good conversation. I apologize we've run so far over, but a lot of great information. So if you don't mind, first off, before we go too far, what is a tool or a habit, something that you do every day, personal, professional, that adds a lot of value to your life that you couldn't do without?
Well, I would have to say, I have a lot to say about this because I actually have this whole article about 5 things you need to create better habits. So if anybody wants more, I'll keep it to 1, but if anybody wants more information on that. But I would say the thing that I personally feel like is good for me every day is the intermittent fasting. So I generally try to keep my eating window to 6 to 8 hours a day, which means I have a 16 to 18 hour fast every day. So I'll typically try to be finished eating by 6 p.m. as often as possible. Sometimes it goes a little later, but and then I'll just, do my routine in the morning, have a little fat in my coffee. The idea, so a fast for autophagy, you really don't want to consume anything. A fast that's more just for keeping your insulin balanced. If you want to have a little fat in your coffee in the morning, that's fine. It's not gonna, the whole conversation about breaking your fast is another whole long conversation.
Okay.
So I like to have little fat in my coffee, and then that helps me extend my time to my first meal. So then I'll eat around noon or whenever I start to get hungry. But I just think that particularly in that morning hour, so you've had your overnight fast, your brain is, like you said, what you've experienced, it's like the opposite of when you have that carby meal the night before. You stop eating at 6, you don't snack before bed, you go get a good sleep, you wake up in the morning and you're like, your brain is like, I'm ready to rock this, and I have that little coffee with my fatty thing in it, and I'm like, get so much production and work done in the morning. So I think for me that intermittent fasting, I know it's good for my health, but it also makes me more productive. So that would be my thing.
Yeah, and the coffee. What do you have in your? I used to drink something in my coffee. It's kind of like butter, but it's really solid. As an
MCT product, the product I use is called Keto Cream, but and it's got collagen and MCT. But there's a bunch of different ones out there, and certainly the one thing I would say to your point earlier about if your goal is weight loss, I wouldn't go putting like 2 sticks of. I mean, some of these fatty coffee things I've seen have like 400 calories. I mean, what I do, I'm talking about it's like 100 calories.
Right.
But I would be careful with that as far as like just caloric dense. But they are delicious, these fatty coffee things.
Yeah, and I can't think of. I can't think about. One. Yeah, this is like a butter ghee. Yeah, ghee. That's what they use. Oh, yeah. What one of the keto podcasts had suggested is have a little bit of ghee in your butter. I mean, a little ghee in your coffee, in your butter. Yeah.
A little ghee in your butter.
Let's try that.
All right, Cheryl. Well, tell everybody who is your client. What can you do for them? And of course, how can they reach out and get a hold of you?
So I do health and wellness coaching. Of course, all of the content that I create is available. Well, most of it is available for free on my website, healnourishgrow.com. I'm Heal Nourish Grow all over social media. So if you just look for me on any of those things, there's so many ways to get in touch with people now.
Yeah, right.
Through direct messages or email or whatever. But I look for people. I mean, a lot of people come to me for keto related, obviously, but I have this whole other side of the health and wellness. Like I like to approach it in a very holistic way. Like, for example, I mentioned the sleep and the stress. Like if somebody's going to come to work with me on weight loss, I'm going to be asking a lot more questions, not just about what you ate that day, right? I'm going to be asking about, well, how's your job going? How's your relationship? Are you sleeping well? There's so many things that can create a picture of health, and it's different for everybody. So if you go to my site, I have this page that's called "What is Ultimate Wellness?"
Okay.
And that's part of my hashtag that you or my tagline that you said on my website, and that is to say that it's different for everybody. Like my personal version of ultimate wellness is going to be very different from yours, very different from Terry's, very different from everybody. So first, part of the thing I like to have people do is, identify some of their core values and goals and things like that. And so the people that I'm working with, generally, I try to tell them this before, because some people are like, just tell me what to eat. And that's probably not my perfect client, because I just don't think that that's going to generate the most amount of success or happiness for a person if they're not ready to delve into some of this other stuff, which I get it. Everybody's in a different place. Yeah. But for me, that's the people I get most excited about working about, is like, they're like, yeah, I'm ready to tackle this whole thing. And I realize it's not just what I eat. Like I've got to look at some of this other stuff too. Yeah. So
important.
I think that was
yeah. I mean, it's for us, we look at it well-rounded. Like it's not only what we eat, but it's that sleep component. It's the water intake. It's reducing the stress. It's, just putting yourself in a better position all the way around.
Mentally, mindset, all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That's going to do it, I guess, for another episode of Feeding Fatty. You can find us, of course, at www.feedingfatty.com, and we're on the social media as well, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then also this interview the video portion will go up on YouTube when the episode is released. So we also are on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, Spotify. If we're not on your favorite podcast platform, let me know. We'll be sure and add you. So, Cheryl, thank you so much for giving us all this extra time. We certainly do appreciate it.
Thank you, Cheryl. You've been very helpful.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, so many things that we haven't talked about yet.
Yep. Y'all reach out and see how Cheryl can help y'all. All right. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your health.
Bye.